All right, Bob. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Catherine Mattice Zundel. I am the HR consultant behind Civility Partners, and Bob Sutton and I have become friends as he's participated in a conference that I put on, and he wrote a testimonial for the back of my first book, Back Off, and he, of course, has a new book out. So how are you doing, Bob? Tell us about your new book a little bit.
Well, my new book's called The Asshole Survival Guide: How to Deal with People Who Treat You Like Dirt. And essentially, I wrote a book called The No Asshole Rule about how to build civilized cultures, something that you actually do, I just talk about. And one thing I noticed was I was just deluged with stories and emails where people essentially said, I'm dealing with a jerk or a bunch of them. What do I do? What do I do? And they just came in over and over. I actually got like another 5 today. And I
Wow.
was writing all these answers, so I thought I would try to step back and write one book that attempted to address the question. I don't think they're ever answered completely. So that's what my book is about, is to hopefully provide a little bit of useful help from people who feel bullied in some way.
Yeah, yeah, and as we were just talking, it's very validating for people to see books out there that where it's like, there's my problem being described. So I had a couple questions that I had planned out for us. So let me go ahead and ask you my first
Sure.
one. So in my experience as an expert in workplace bullying, I've definitely seen that HR has a hard time convincing leadership to step in and put a stop to bullying and focus on creating a positive workplace culture. It seems like common sense to you and I to that culture
Yep.
would, drive performance and innovation and things like that. Why is this so hard for leaders to understand?
Well, it's an interesting question because there are some leaders out there, maybe too many, who are so focused on the short term and also believe the money, and they also believe that if they just are innovative, then all the money will come. But the
Okay.
problem, as I think that you say so elegantly, is that you've got to have a positive culture. You've got to have psychological safety, or you don't get the kind of innovation and great employees you need year after year. So in some ways, I don't get it. And maybe I'm being overly optimistic about the terrible news we're having lately. But one thing that I'm seeing, well, Silicon Valley, the entertainment industry, that there's a general understanding that the nastiness, the sexism, the sexual assault
Hmm.
is although it's a huge problem, it's also part of the same iceberg that has the general sort of bullying, because both you and I know that many demeaning things happen in the workplace that undermine creativity, productivity, drive out the best employees, and they may not meet the legal definition of sexual harassment or racism, but they're still doing all sorts of damage. So at least my hope is that if you're looking at even just from a risk management standpoint,
Hmm.
I'm thinking of people in the legal department. We were just talking about this before we started. If
Yeah.
I was a general counsel, I would say that culture as a risk is a more vivid sort of thing. And then we have, the Uber story and United Airlines story.
Yeah.
So maybe it isn't to do positive things for the right reason. It's because if I don't do it, it creates a risk management problem for me.
Yeah. At the
And
very
I'm
least, do
starting
it
to see
because
that.
it makes you safer. It makes the company safer.
Yeah, so we've got to team up with the lawyers and the paranoid senior executives. We might be okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's fascinating that you have to sometimes do that. And I like a lot of times I'm talking to HR about, hey, all it takes is one racial slur out of maybe years of bullying, and now all of a sudden that one racial slur takes it to a whole new legal level. And it's unfortunate that we even have to talk about it that way, that we
Yep,
should just be able to say people need to feel safe and healthy and happy in your work environment. So.
yep.
Okay, so your newest book, The Asshole Survival Guide, is all about how to maneuver the situation with an asshole. If you could pick one piece of advice out of that
Oh,
book that you could give, for like, what's the number one piece of advice in
no,
there?
that's not fair because I wrote a whole book, but I'll go with it anyway. So if I was to pick one, I would pick something that it ends the first chapter. So this is to me the frame, which is at least in all of the research and the conversations that I've done on bullying, especially if you look at the academic research. One of the things that's really clear is that the person least likely to take responsibility or to blame themselves is the person who is the bully in the situation. And so a lot of times, and I'm sure you see this in your practice and in your work, that there's these people who everywhere they go they see assholes, and
Yep.
the one they don't see is themselves.
Yep.
So this idea, and then there's other people who aren't assholes, but they're kind of toxic enablers or
Mhm.
bystanders. So my mantra at the end of the first chapter is to be slow to label other people as assholes
Mhm.
and quick to label yourself. And even if you're good about that, you're still probably not overcoming the biases.
Right.
Um, and so that's, I guess, one that I would pick. I've got specific, methods and techniques as you do, but the sort of framing that to be part of the solution, you've got to realize the situations where you might just be a temporary asshole, because sometimes some of us are fine except for that one team or that one group with the person we can't stand that's in the place
Right.
that's horrible.
Right.
So I guess this is a general call for self-awareness that many of us do. But this idea, especially of being a little quicker to label yourself, I think would help many of us, including myself. So,
Yeah, agreed,
yeah.
agreed. We're not all perfect, so we got to recognize where we maybe act out a little bit. And that actually leads to my next question, which was around intention. So a lot of stuff out there online around workplace bullying is all that, these people do it intentionally. What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, well, so if you look, I don't want to like dig too deep into personality types, but there are some people who essentially it makes them feel good to make other people feel bad. So people of Machiavellian personality,
Mm-hmm.
people who are often high school bullies or schoolyard bullies. There's some evidence that literally the pleasure centers in their brain light up when they make other people struggle. So
Okay.
there are people like that, but from what I can tell, in the low percentage of people who admit to being bullies on a regular basis also backs this up. From what I can tell, the lion's share of bullying is done by people who are unaware of the degree to which they are leaving other people feeling hurt. They
Right.
might think that they lost a little bit of their temper, and especially when people get powerful, they're especially oblivious to the reactions of other people. A lot of evidence that when people are powerful, they're less empathetic, they focus less on the needs of others, and they're just kind
Oh,
of focusing on getting what they want. They're not being empathetic. They're just viewing people as objects towards an end,
right. Okay.
and and they're not having any or much empathy for them. So there's a lot of reasons to believe that although yes, there's people out there who are just nuts. There are people out there who might be strategic assholes. Oh, the way I'm going to get ahead is by stomping on this person on the
Right.
way to the top. But a lot of it is just the cluelessness that we human beings have in general, and in particular as people get more powerful, they get less empathetic. They focus more on their own needs. They have less impulse control. So you'd have to get sort of a literature review of the literally hundreds of thousands of studies we have on this now.
Right.
But my sense on the research is that the lion's share of it is people who ask them, "Were you being an asshole?" They would say no. And
Right.
every now and then they might say they deserved it. So I guess in some ways this is a similar answer to the one I had to your other question, which is that the self-awareness part is tough for all of us.
Right. Well, I didn't mention this to you before, but I coach bullies as part of my business.
Oh,
And so I was curious your thoughts, and that's been my experience as well, is they often just have no idea. And part of my coaching is to do interviews with 8 people, and then I show those perceptions, and I basically say, here's what people are saying, and they're always very shocked and hurt that nobody told them about it. That it's like one guy I'm coaching
wow.
right now, he literally said, so I've been walking around like an asshole for 3 years and no one ever
No one
told me.
told-
What the heck, And so it's like they're hurt that people have been letting them, walk around with toilet paper on their shoe and no,
Oh, that's
nobody said
so
anything.
so so one of the that's really fascinating. So one of the first times I really started thinking about this, before I even started looking at the academic research on it, my wife was she was a large law firm for 25 years. For 8 years, she was the managing partner. And so when a lawyer was bad, and lawyers can be bad when it comes to
Uh-huh.
assholes, it was her job to go talk to them and explain to them what was going on, that you are hurting other people.
Okay.
And she had this distinction. One was strategic assholes. Those are the ones who would treat other people like dirt because they thought that's how you got ahead, right?
Right, right.
And she said actually they weren't that hard to deal with because they were in control of their emotions and were aware. But in most cases, to your point, they were clueless assholes. When you told them, they were just crushed. Now,
Yep.
they didn't mean they had the skills to actually do anything about it. That's a different problem, which I suspect you're working on.
Yep.
But I remember her talking about, I just much rather work with a strategic than a clueless asshole, because they know they're already doing it, and they have some control over their emotions. So kind of
Okay. See,
weird.
I'd rather work with the clueless ones because then you get to help them. I get to help them develop strategies and teach them new ways to do things and help them be more effective. So that's interesting.
That's so healthy. Well, I think she was just talking about in terms of how quickly it could be cured, because just a little money sometimes solved that problem. By the way, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, well, actually, I've noticed even right after they get that list of perceptions of them, they often
Uh,
start to change on their own pretty quickly because they start going, uh-oh, is this going to be perceived a certain way? I better be quiet. And they kind of start to clam up just because they don't want to keep pushing people. So
well, that's
let's see,
cool.
what was one of my other questions? Okay, so one thing in my own consulting business is that a lot of HR people want to solve the problem, but they don't know where to begin. Do you have some advice for those HR people about kind of like what's the first step to solving the problem if there's an asshole in your workplace?
Well, the first step is I think that you've already said. The first step for me is, if you've got the evidence that that person is like that, is for somebody who they trust or are afraid of, to have the courage to pull them aside and to say what you're doing is not constructive. And this, one of my favorite now friends and books out there is Kim Scott's Radical Candor, and
Okay.
she talks about this idea that a lot of times there's this ruinous empathy where you're afraid to tell people the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point of what you've been learning in your consulting practice, when you don't tell people the truth, you're doing them a disservice. And
Yeah.
I suspect that's one of the reasons that you get hired, and even I get hired sometimes, is that some executive doesn't have the courage to tell people the truth that they already know.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that the first step is some sort of constructive conversation, which is different than dealing with the cultural stuff, which I think we're going to talk about because I know you work a lot on culture.
Yeah.
But to me, that the first step is to try to have a conversation with them and see what happens.
Agreed, agreed. You got to tell them what's going on. So speaking of culture, just because we were talking about this earlier, I work with companies to help them solve the culture of bullying and create positive environments, and you work with organizations ultimately to help them create innovative cultures. Just curious what some of your steps are when you're helping companies be more innovative. What is that? What kinds of things are you doing?
I mean, we do lots of things with it. It depends where they are at. Sometimes,
Okay.
I would do the distinction between you've got like a new company and you're starting it to be innovative, and then what you try to do is you help them set the norm so that people feel psychologically safe, so that give them the skills so they can do things like brainstorm, so they can the skills so that they're customer focused and they go out there and have empathy for who they're building stuff for. Ideas like rapid prototyping.
Okay.
Having some, I do believe somewhat in hierarchy. I don't believe that you can get rid of it completely, but having a hierarchy where people feel safe to push back,
Okay.
but still at the same time understand that somebody is going to make the final decision, so they move quickly. So there's that sort of stuff, and then the other sort of stuff we do is to help big companies to sort of become more innovative. And one of the classic things is that they'll have a bunch of customers, a way of doing stuff that they've done forever, and they're making money, but they make less every year. And then you try to figure out what's the next thing. So one of our favorite examples, which was done in our classes, was with the San Francisco Opera.
Okay.
Which, if you've ever been to opera, I'm 63 years old. It's a place I can go to feel young. Like
Okay.
when I'm waiting in line, I don't have a walker or a wheelchair, so I feel young.
Okay.
So anyways, San Francisco Opera knows they have this problem, And so they started trying to figure out ways, and our students work with them to have events like in hip places where people would come from the opera dressed in blue jeans and T-shirts and sing their opera stuff. And
Okay.
and they're doing this regularly now in San Francisco, and it's so much fun. So that's the kind of stuff that we would do. Would be to, in that case, what you're doing, it's almost the equivalent of a skunk works or something. You create something separate. So,
Yeah.
but in the stuff that we do, and I also do stuff on scaling or spreading excellence. But one problem is like, how do you get it right in the first place? And the other problem is, well, what can you do to fix it now that we've become a big dumb company, if you will, that does a few things really well, but
Right.
and the opera's perfect because they just lose a little bit every year, or I haven't worked with them a lot. I worked a little bit with Walmart. Walmart, they've got some issues too. So, anyways.
Walmart? No. All right. So, so last question. I know you haven't actually taken my workplace culture makeover masterclass, but I just released it, and so I sent you the page so you could take a
Right.
look at it. Just curious, what are your thoughts on my masterclass?
Well, so looking over it, the thing that I like about it is that you've got a clear recognition that if you are building, if you will, a civilized, positive culture, that it's like there's not like one thing you do. It's a very systemic approach.
Uh-huh.
So you have what you call like that task force or something that works on
Yeah,
it.
yeah, the action committee. Yeah, that works
You
together.
have an
Yeah.
action committee. You set a clear goal for what is positive behavior. You focus on the performance evaluation. You focus on the selection. So to me, the thing that I like about it is it's a systematic perspective. And because changing or setting a culture doesn't happen all at once, you kind of got to get all the parts and fit them together.
Yeah.
So it looks to me like the kind of things that many organizations could benefit from, and not just mature ones. A lot of times, what happens, that we see with some of the startups, is they kind of get to 50 or 75 people, and if they had done something like what you're talking about early, it
Mm-hmm.
would literally save them bazillions of dollars later. And so that's one thing that I really liked about it, is it's a way to instill a real strong sort of point of view.
Yes. Fix your culture as you're growing. Don't wait until it's all said and done. So, well, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me. I know that my e-newsletter readers will really appreciate it. So, thank you.
Thanks, it was fun, and it's great getting to know you a little bit and to learn more about your work. We need more people like you working with organizations, actually sort of getting in the muck with both the culture part and the specific people who mean well but need to change their behavior. So it's great to get to know you, and I hope we can work together again in the future.
Well, thank you. You heard it, folks, from the New York Times bestseller that I'm on to something here. Thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye bye.